I declare this CM Thinks meeting open, and let me just add my welcome to everyone else to say it's really, really lovely that you're here with us this morning. It's an opportunity, as you've heard, for a deeper dive into the SAFER campaign, the campaign which is promoting strategic adaptation for emergency resilience, and that was a campaign launched in London a few weeks ago, as you'll have heard. I'm Caroline Lucas, former Green Party MP, and I'm one of the advisors to the campaign, and I'll be chairing this morning's session. And before I hand over to Rupert and Liam to introduce the SAFER report in more detail, I just wanted to say a few words about why I particularly appreciate the campaign and why I'm supporting it. And the first thing to say, obviously, is that nothing like enough is being done when it comes to climate adaptation, and this stuff is incredibly urgent. So this is a new campaign that aims to put climate adaptation much higher up the policy agenda. Not instead of mitigation, I hasten to add, but properly there alongside it. And it makes the case for tangible, locally relevant measures that protect communities for increasing climate impacts, while at the same time we believe galvanizing public support for more radical climate intervention. And the problem is, as we see it, that under successive governments, adaptation has been the so-called Cinderella of climate action. It's been under-resourced and underfunded. And so you've got people like the Climate Change Committee saying in its progress report just a little earlier this year, in their words, progress is either too slow, it's stalled, or it's heading in the wrong direction. And in fact, it couldn't rate a single one of the government's 46 adaptation outcomes as good. And even when adaptation measures are being pursued, they frequently take the form of short-term fixes like flood barriers or piecemeal reactive measures that can themselves come at high carbon cost. And so as a result, it's been estimated that without urgent action, we could actually see 10,000 heat-related deaths a year in the UK by the 2050s. Already, we know that over 6 million homes, over a third of railways and roads, over half of the UK's top quality agricultural land, all of that is at risk from flooding right now. So in essence, climate impacts are no longer a distant threat. They are a present reality here in the UK with worse to come. And to put it very bluntly, the horrifying scenes from the floods in Texas and Valencia won't stay in Texas and Valencia. The UK is not immune, no matter what our political leaders sometimes seem to think. I just wanted to say a few words as well about why I think adaptation is actually essential to mitigation. And that comes back to this kind of downplaying of adaptation, because I would argue that climate adaptation has regularly been misunderstood as a concept and deprioritized as a policy. And I think in a way too often it's been seen as some kind of admission of defeat. It's seen as something to resort to when efforts at climate mitigation or emission reduction are failing. And I think even some in the climate movement view it as a distraction from the urgent task of decarbonisation. And I'd make the case that nothing could be further from the truth, that far from being a distraction from decarbonisation, strategic adaptation can be a catalyst for it by transforming climate breakdown from the status of an abstract threat that perhaps isn't really motivating people yet to a lived and shared reality. So by starting with the immediacy of community resilience, rather than what can often seem like a kind of an abstraction of greenhouse gases, strategic adaptation can act as a powerful tool to raise engagement among those for whom climate action still isn't a priority. In other words, it's by demonstrating the benefits of climate action in terms of practical, tangible outcomes in people's own communities and their own lives that we have much more potential, I think, of galvanizing public support for more radical climate intervention. And let's not forget the recent research that showed that 89% of people globally, including in the UK, want stronger climate action. And in a sense, I think one of our tasks is to make that group visible to themselves, to let them know in a really visceral way that they are indeed part of that majority. And not only that, but I think that the kind of collaboration that strategic adaptation envisages in the face of a common threat also has the potential to help restore collective purpose and identity. So let me just stress again, none of this is to downplay mitigation and decarbonisation. They remain as urgent as ever. But it is to say that adaptation has to be a much bigger part of the agenda as well. And my final words, just as way of introduction, would be to say that one of the other reasons that I think this agenda is so important is that at a time when the populist right is deliberately weaponizing climate policy and climate action, I think this safer approach, the strategic adaptation approach, can deliver a deeper transformation as well. In other words, it can be an approach that is based on depolarization. It can be a way of doing politics that moves beyond the kind of culture wars with a program that is real and local, that is collaborative and is respectful. And its potential, in fact, to be a kind of a bulwark against further attacks on climate action might turn out to be one of its most important contributions. So by way of summary, I think that strategic adaptation can transform not just economies, but communities. I think it can strengthen them against natural disasters, of course, but it can also offer new ways to bind people together, to increase their inner resilience, to set out a route to engage the previously disengaged or skeptical, that it can offer authentic hope and over time earn the permission to dream bigger together. And as the climate emergency accelerates, then that task is clearly more urgent than ever. And that's why one of the aims of the Safer campaign is also to showcase and celebrate and amplify what's already happening at a local level. We are not claiming that this is our monopoly. We know that there's already so much amazing work going on in localities up and down the country. What we're hoping to do is just to add some more strength to that, to amplify and connect it, because we know that they or you are on the front line of transforming public engagement with this, the greatest crisis of our times. So with those few words, let me hand over to Rupert and Liam to introduce the report in more detail. And I think it's probably going to Rupert first.
No, it's him.
It's okay. It was a 50-50 chance. And let me go to Liam Kavanagh, one of the co-founders and co-directors of the Climate Majority Project, who I hope is here.
Yeah, and I'm here. I'm here.
Good. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Carolyn. So now for the report. So Carolyn has helpfully outlined the kind of main arguments already, but we're going to go into them a little bit more detail. Starting with, we can just move to the next slide. So one way of starting us off is just say, let's face it, we failed. One of my favorite political leaders of the 20th century, Julius Nyerere, who was the first president of Tanzania, ended his term in office by getting up and giving a speech which started with, let's face it, I failed, which made him, in my opinion, one of the most noble people that has really the 20th century produced. And I think, we should follow his example in many ways by owning it. And that includes, the Climate Majority Project and the people involved. The adaptation era is here, whether we like it or not. Local responses are increasing across the globe. Okay. We've reached levels of warming 1.5 degrees C that science warned us not to. And that statistic is not going to mobilize the public. Stats don't do that. We know that by now, but what it means likely will. It means more and worse disasters and more denial of insurance coverage are on their way. Although overwhelming majorities already find the weather changes we've experienced concerning, what's coming sort of beggars that by comparison. Right? So across the globe, the adaptation is here because of past failures, and denying that doesn't help anybody, certainly not the most vulnerable. And success of climate action is only going to come when the concerned majority becomes the involved majority. Luckily, adaptation itself is probably our best chance to involve the majority in an effective climate response. As I'm going to re-emphasize something that I think is necessary to keep on coming back to, that we don't think climate campaigners have much choice about whether adaptation becomes more prominent, right? We're not choosing to start the adaptation era in the Safer campaign. What we're saying is that it has started. We have no choice whether it's more prominent. What we can influence is how adaptation is seen, whether it is seen as a competitor to decarbonization or whether it is a forward-looking strategic companion to decarbonization. Safer is about promoting the latter view among the many people who are going to become more interested in adaptation very soon. So next slide here. Adaptation can broaden engagement in climate action by making the climate threat concrete. Food shortages, overheating, flood, fires, and community strains are all very concrete, right? As Carolyn mentioned. It also allows us to accept these concrete threats because it provides a direct way of responding. It means addressing food shortages, increasing community cohesion, improving housing stocks, and preparing for floods and fires, right? So we often hear about talking about how the bad stuff around climate can be overwhelming. We shouldn't put pictures of flames on report covers or on ads. But part of that advice is that those are overwhelming, and they are overwhelming if we only think about responding to their root cause, global emissions, which we can't really address. So most people have felt overwhelmed, right, on an individual basis, right? Nobody can drop their emissions enough to change their future, but everybody can adapt in a way that changes their future. So that makes engaging with those concrete threats more psychologically plausible. And the implications of that are absolutely huge. It means that adaptation, next slide, it means that adaptation done right can disrupt the basic dynamic of climate inaction. We've been hiding from the truth, talking in terms of comfortably numbing abstractions like CO2 levels rather than their concrete consequences, pretending we've still got more time and isn't quite so bad because we don't think we can face reality or do anything about it. But we can adapt. We can become safer. They're not safe. Local adaptation processes, if held in good faith, will conclude that they can do a lot, but they cannot fully offset climate chaos, a point we'll return to later. But decarbonization will remain necessary, right? Let's hold those adaptation processes in good faith rather than trying to remain in the decarbonization era. More on that later. But first, let's talk about another way that adaptation can increase engagement. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So adaptation also involves and promotes inner psychological resilience of individuals and communities. This must be discussed more publicly because this dimension is neglected, even though it's crucial. Right now, we're trapped in a vicious cycle. Climate chaos can cause overwhelm, which is amplified by interrelated crises, from geopolitical instability to social fragmentation. That psychological overwhelm, in turn, halts engagement with climate reality and support for systems change, which in turn makes the situation worse, more overwhelming. The most important way of breaking those cycles are found within communities. We can face our fears together where we live and work. Local action comes with emotional support built in. Building the inner resilience of communities is paramount because socially cohesive, connected communities organize to handle disasters better. So a virtuous cycle can happen as part of adaptation. Concrete activity around outer local adaptation initiatives can help build the bonds that support inner resilience, which in turn supports action. So inner and outer resilience should not be considered separate domains, but as two essential dimensions of adaptation. Okay, and now let's go to the next slide. Okay. That's another way that adaptation can involve more people by allowing them to have the emotional support that keeps them from being overwhelmed. But let's talk about why these can be different people than we've traditionally seen in the climate movement. So as we've mentioned several times now, climate action is dominated by abstract discussions of CO2 levels and global moral responsibilities. And so in turn, the image of climate action is dominated by about 14% of the population, which sociologists call progressive activists, that find that abstract pre-adaptation era climate rhetoric appealing. They tend to be university educated, to be motivated by global thinking and abstract moral arguments. But most of the population is a little bit different. They would respond to climate action being more concrete, personal, local, and able to be acted upon. And that would change everything if it was that way. If adaptation or climate action appealed to the silent majority, the two-thirds of the public that is concerned about climate change, but doesn't really fit the image of activists or take part in local lobbying, right? Then that's going to be transformative. These people think about their communities first and don't feel their voice matters on global issues, and they're not terribly apologetic about those things either. If that group, which includes a lot of people that I think all of us know here, a lot of people that I grew up with, if that group accepts climate reality, then we have the best chance of success. So, and I'd like to say that I am exactly the kind of person that's been concerned about climate change for years, but not felt that progress would happen until it was impossible to deny. I was never really at home personally in activist culture or felt that I achieved a lot by going to marches, but I did promise myself that when we got to the point when concrete events made it impossible for the majority to ignore climate change, I'd get involved. And part of that was really why I helped to start CMP. And I think there's millions of people like me here in the UK and billions across the world. So in the adaptation era, there's new hope. So now over to Rupert to discuss more about why adaptation will cause collective action to be much more effective than in the past.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So here is a really critically important point. There is a horrible coordination problem. It's sometimes also called a collective action problem or a free rider problem that haunts the climate question. It is that, as is well known, if you are trying to mitigate, to decarbonize, to tackle the problem, the emergency at source, you basically need to get nearly everybody on board, which of course is what we are trying to do. But the point is, if you just try to get nearly everybody on board directly, you're going to be facing into this problem that everybody then thinks, why should I sacrifice when not everybody else is sacrificing yet? Why should I move when my move makes hardly any difference when most other people aren't yet moving? And this can hold people back for a long time and has done so. Now, this coordination problem, which is one of the main, I would say, the single most important devastating reason for why we are where we are, this coordination problem can be evaded to a very large extent by taking an approach that begins with adaptation. How so? Well, it's already implicit in what Liam has said, and we'll explore it more in the next few minutes. Basically, the key thing about adaptation is that it is something that people can see themselves making a difference on, along with other people, locally, where they live, on the relatively short term. And this makes it far easier for people to think, well, this makes sense for me to do, whether or not people in China or whatever are taking action. So strategic adaptation largely evades the devastating coordination problem that's cast a vast shadow over climate action so far. Next slide, please. Moreover, and this is really quite important, especially to those wonderful progressive activists on the call, adaptation is not something which we should think of as confined to that local area where we live. Adaptation is something which, of course, is relevant all over the world, especially on what are sometimes called the climate front lines. And in this sense, adaptation and support of adaptation is an expression, an absolutely vital expression now of climate justice. If you do not engage in adaptation, if you do not support and fund adaptation adequately, then you don't actually believe in climate justice. You're not serious about it anymore. Sorry to put it as bluntly as that, but that is the case. If you are not engaging in supporting and agitating for adaptation that happens everywhere, especially where people are the most vulnerable, then you are not caring for those vulnerable people, because we are way past the time now when it was possible to say, oh, it's okay, we're going to solve the problem at source, we're going to prevent it, we're going to apply the precautionary principle and everything's going to be fine. Everything is not going to be fine and never is going to be again in our lifetimes. Strategic adaptation is an expression, a direct expression of climate justice. The poor abroad are, of course, on balance, usually the most at risk. The same is true at home. So let me put this in the following way. If one is trying to make climate relevant to working class people, marginalized people, one has to be serious about adaptation, right? If what one is saying is, oh, this is all about reducing our collective footprint, so you need to play your part by reducing your footprint, how is that relevant to somebody who's got a very low footprint already? If we want people in low-lying areas, in constituencies on the eastern side of England, in, for an example, the kind of places that have been voting reform recently, if we want them to take our agenda seriously, we have to get serious about strategic adaptation. Strategic adaptation is an expression of climate justice abroad and at home. It is how we make climate relevant to everybody. Next slide, please. And here's the really good news. There's a win-win-win in store if we do it properly, if adaptation is done properly, if it's done strategically, if it's not done in a half-assed, reactive, defensive, expensive, carbon-heavy way. If we do it properly, then we build community, we build solidarity around us taking together the steps that are needed to protect ourselves against what is coming. We work with nature, not against nature. Ecosystems-based adaptation is at the core of a lot of what strategic adaptation is. I mean, if you're living in India, say, something like restoring mangroves around the coast. If you're living in this country, restoring wetlands, restoring peatlands, enabling rivers to move again, bringing back beavers, creating better upland land management, reducing the amount of grouse hunting that goes on. The list goes on and on and on. These are the actual effective ways in which we adapt and build resilience. So working with nature, not against nature. Moving towards the life that we want. That's what I call the beautiful coincidence. The things we need to do to stop causing climate chaos, to start protecting ourselves, and to have better lives all largely coincide. When we recreate local food hubs and food networks, when we build community together where we live in relation to the threats that are coming, when we do these kinds of things, we are making our lives better in the process, as in the famous cartoon that I know Caroline loves. What if we do all these things and recreate community and have renewable energy and have more local food, etc., and climate change turns out to be a hoax? Yeah, we move towards the life that we want, and it's a win-win-win. And finally, and crucially, and this is why it's in bold, as has already been hinted, the beautiful thing about strategic adaptation also is that it synergizes directly with decarbonisation. When you recreate peatlands, when you adapt in ways that enable food miles to be shorter, when you create renewable energy to build resilience, all of these things, obviously, are synergistic with decarbonisation, and that is absolutely critical. Strategic adaptation, transformative adaptation is synergistic with decarbonisation, and that's how ultimately, of course, we stop causing climate chaos. Next slide, please. And look, I'm sorry while some of you are still eating your breakfast to dump this slide on you with this person's ugly mug on the right-hand side of it. But this is building on what Caroline and Liam have already said. There is a carrot here I've just described, but there is also a stick. Well, there's more than one stick, right? The bigger stick is that if we don't adapt, the climate is going to whoop us. But there's another stick, which is that if we don't adapt in the right way, then right-wing populists are potentially going to whoop us. People like Richard Tice are actively talking about adaptation as an alternative to decarbonisation. They are talking about it in this narrow reactive way. This is what some reform councils are starting to do. Other reform councils are going the whole hog and saying we don't need to adapt at all, but some are saying let's take money out of net zero and put it into hard local flood defences. They are coming for adaptation. They are coming for the concept. We have to be ready to fight back. And the way we fight back is by making clear that we mean it, that we are moving into this space, that we are not shying away from it, and that we are actively seeking to struggle, engage in the rhetorical struggle to prove the meaning of adaptation that we actually need, to say, look, we need to do this in the strategic ways that I outlined on the previous slide. And when I say we, by the way, as in the lower bullet points here, this we needs to be very large, right? It's the climate majority. You're not going to get outright dodgy climate deniers like Richard Tice on board. But what we should be hoping to do is get most conservatives on board, the James Cleverleys of this world, for example. What we should be hoping to do is appeal to many reform voters, including loyal nationals and some disengaged battlers, to talk about some of the other categories beside progressive activists that Liam mentioned earlier. If we do this right, we can actively undermine forces like Reform on this issue because they are vulnerable on it, because many of their voters really care about nature and many of their voters really care about climate, especially, interestingly, this cephalogical category called loyal nationals. So the stakes here are very, very high. The opportunities are high, but the risks are very high too. Next slide, please. So I will now hand back to Liam for a word on how we win this definition contest.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rupert. So it's a short argument here for why we think the climate movement will win the struggle to define adaptation if we take it up, right? It's far from inevitable, but it is very winnable. Okay, we can win because when good faith adaptation processes actually engage with the challenges they face, if we set up processes that work, that follow democratic principles and open debate, people are going to realize that reactive defense measures can't cancel out climate change. And a one-word argument for that is 𝐚𝐜𝐭𝐞𝐝. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current is the reason why Britain is so unusually warm given its northerly latitude, right? And it may start breaking down soon. People are going to think about it more as they think about adapting. We can't just adapt to that kind of loss and the temperature drops that average between 5 and 10 degrees C and at their height may go as much as 20 degrees C beyond previous lows. Carbon reduction is the only way to stop that breakdown. And strategic adaptation is going to have to adapt to the current's weakening. So if people really start engaging with adaptation realities, they're going to realize that adaptation is necessary and so is decarbonization. So inevitably, we need a strategic adaptation strategy that includes a lot of carbon reduction in order to be the safest we can be. Back to Rupert to round us off.
Next slide, please. Yeah, so Liam already telegraphed this slide. I just want to really underscore the prize if we successfully steer the narrative, if we manage to define adaptation adequately, if we land the idea of strategic adaptation, if we contest the crude, narrow version of adaptation that's being promoted by the Richard Tices of this world, the prize is huge. It's absolutely huge. It is nothing less than a reboot of our entire sense of what climate is as a question and a problem and an emergency and a cause for action. It's a new way into it. I emphasize a way into it because, as we've said over and over again in different ways, this is not at all about deprioritizing decarbonization. What this is about is saying the existing ways that we have sought to decarbonize have on balance failed, and we are facing the consequences. The consequences, and this is the beauty of the horrible situation that we're in, the consequences can themselves provide us with a new way in to the climate question, which has much more chance of succeeding. And when we realize that strategic adaptation is adaptation that synergizes with decarbonization, when we realize that this facing into the impact is the best way of waking people up to the whole thing, and when we realize, as Liam has just said, that adaptation has its limitations, even the best kind. Ultimately, there is no substitute for tackling the underlying coordination problem together. When we realize those kinds of things, then we find our way through adaptation into decarbonisation. But only that, if you will, indirect route, we are arguing in this report, is at all likely to see us arrive anywhere near to the destination where we need to arrive. It's going to be a hard journey, but if we take it via the strategic adaptation route, then we might just be able to arrive. Thanks for that. And that is the end of our little presentation.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Liam and Rupert. Dead on 9 o'clock. Fantastic timing. We now have around 25 minutes or so for questions. So hopefully in a minute, yes, I can now see people. So if you could either put your question in the chat, or you can, in the old-fashioned way, raise a hand, and I will hopefully try to find you. We will take 2 questions at a time, probably. And if you want to say who the question is for, that's also good. But otherwise, we've got quite a number of people from the Safer campaign here who can answer them. And I will go straight to Stephen, whom I can see in the top left-hand corner of my screen. If you'd like to unmute yourself and put your question, thank you. And maybe say if you're from an organisation, that might be useful and interesting to know.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm not from a particular organisation, but I am interested in starting adaptation in my area, and I've spoken to a couple of people. But I'm wondering, and I imagine other people might be in this situation. Where do I start? Is there anything written on how, if I approach people, how do I start? 'Cause it does feel a challenge to know, what to say, and I think this is all great, but it's important to think how can I get started?
Lovely. Thank you, Stephen. I can see that Rupert has already put his hand up, presumably to reply.
Yes, I wasn't going to ask another question. I thought I'd try replying to that one. Yeah, Stephen, a great question. I'm sure it's a question which many people here have on their minds. Let me try to start an answer to it, and it may be that others from the Safer team want to add to my answer. So one thing I would say is that a great way to start is by having a talk that is focused around adaptation take place in your area. Now, there are many people on this call who are capable of giving such a talk on an ad hoc basis. But what I'll also mention is something which most of you won't be aware of, which is that as part of the Safer plans rolling forward, we are rolling out a Safer talk / experience, which is going to start this autumn and then gradually, we hope, ramp up and tour more of the country. It needs resourcing, it needs some financing to get it going at the scale we want it to go at. But it is possible that if you put in a request, and this goes for others here as well, it is possible that sometime in the remainder of this year or early next year, one of us would be able to, or 2 of us, in fact, would be able to come and deliver the Safer talk in your area. And we think that that will be an exceptionally good way of doing what you are asking for there. Another thing that I'll say is that, again, in our plans going forward, is to have what we call a Safer toolkit, which will be available to anybody and everybody, and will give you handy hints for the kinds of things that you want and need to do in your local area to get adaptation action ramped up. The final thing I'll say before just checking in to see if any of the rest of the team want to add anything is that, as you may or may not have noticed, there are loads of really impressive people in the chat who are doing a lot of this work themselves. At the Safer launch in London a few weeks ago, Caroline and I hosted a couple of superb examples of local adaptation initiatives. We wanted to showcase them prominently in that launch because we think that it's very important for people to understand that this is not about saying, oh, there's something that needs to happen here that isn't happening at all. It's much more about saying, stuff is happening. We want to network it and add to it and publicize it more and so forth, especially, the best stuff. I've been looking at the chat. There's a lot of really top adaptation folks on the ground level who are already doing that stuff. And so I would say to you, Stephen, it's possible that you could learn from some of them or connect with some of them. And people, in fact, may want to make more offers along those lines in the chat. Anyone want to add to what I've outlined there? Or does that cover it?
Someone is asking how they make the request for the talk to come to their area. So maybe Nick or Ed could answer that bit.
Funnily enough, I've just had a WhatsApp from someone in St Albans asking me to do it, because I know there's a couple of people here from St Albans. So yeah, I mean, make the requests. I mean, we are, it's early days, so we are piloting it. You know, so it's going to take a little while. It's on the timescale that Rupert mentioned there, autumn. But yeah, send us your requests and we can pass it on to the Safer team.
Lovely.
Safer talk team.
I should have probably introduced you. Your session is a bit late in the morning, but Ed Jarvis, Nick Drew are both sort of co-managers of the Safer campaign, and who were doing lots of the work. I was going to say at the coalface, but that was a very bad analogy. I'm just looking at other questions in the chat, and just to say again to Stephen, there are some answers and some suggestions in the chat relative to your question. Cara Narden says, will this be joining up the climate adaptation organisations and toolkits like the local climate adaptation toolkit, LCAT, and support local authorities adaptation delivery? Is anyone who can, and I'm sure the answer is yes, but can anyone say anything more specific to that? Yeah, lovely, Nick, thank you.
Yes, is the answer. So we're already in discussions with some of the folks like Peter Lefort and others who are involved in the local climate adaptation toolkit. Really part of what I'm especially keen that we achieve through Safer is to start to really make some of these connections and start to really get a better understanding as a movement around adaptation, what's out there, how people can connect and share the good practice that's already going on. There's a lot of things that's happening in different pockets, but it feels really important that we get some of that cross connection happening between some of those things, and really if we could just start to share those examples of good practice more widely, I think that'd be very inspiring to a number of people who just probably aren't aware of them, because a lot of them are sort of happening without sufficient spotlight being shown on them. So yeah, that's definitely something we're up to.
Lovely, thanks, Nick. There are quite a few questions around councils. I'm just looking at Juliet. I'm interested to know if there's a way to push councils to adopt more of the adaptation processes with no budget and limited officer time available. Is it best to try and do this outside of councils? And then a couple of people have kind of, reinforced the fact that it's a real challenge that councils are under such pressure at the minute in terms of time and people. I don't know if anyone wants to make a reflection on that. Rupert, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll make a start on that. The basic point here we strongly agree with. We need to face the fact that this is a ridiculously over-centralized country. Now, that needs to change for all sorts of reasons. It's going to be a while before it changes. The current government has no appetite to change, despite their so-called devolution proposals, which arguably are a kind of mini centralization. So where do we go from here? So as the questioners make clear, really, it isn't on to expect councils with their current levels of resourcing to do all of this. So that to us implies a few things. Firstly, yeah, we need to try to encourage and help councils to be able to do more directly. But secondly, and more importantly, we need to put pressure on the national level. Now, that is why we are taking the action that we are taking on the national level. But before the end of this call, Ed and Nick will tell you a bit more about what that is and how you can get involved. So I won't preempt that. And thirdly, we need to act ourselves, right? It's no good waiting around and hoping that local government, which is cash strapped, is going to be able to get all of this sorted, nor that national government, whose eyes are not nearly on this enough at the moment, is going to get it sorted. We need to move ahead of them ourselves. That can seem a bit daunting, but as we said before, people here on this call are doing it. in inspiring ways. And moreover, the more of us step up and do it and help each other and recognize best practice and build on that best practice. And Peter Lefort and his colleagues are among the leaders in that already. The more we do that, the less bad the situation will be, and the more pressure we will start to put on government, etc. Right? Ultimately, this could be a matter of inspiring voters and government in terms of what needs to be done, and frankly, shaming government in terms of saying, look, we're doing this stuff locally, you're not helping, even though it's brilliant and it's obvious that it's necessary. Why not? That is kind of part of what Retrofit Balsall Heath are doing, who we had presenting at our launch in London recently. They are developing such an inspiring example of how to build local resilience in their poor part of Birmingham that, well, if that is sufficiently publicized, scaled up, etc., I think it could really make a difference to what government does over time. Final point on this. We can't wait around for national government or local government to fix this, partly because this crisis is here and it is escalating. One reason which is not given sufficient attention why it is deeply foolish for this country to be as over-centralized as it is we are going to have impacts from climate and maybe also from war, terrorism, AI-induced breakdown, etc. in the coming decade or two. We're going to have impacts which governmental forces are not ready to handle. That's a prediction. It may turn out to be wrong. I'm sorry to be very confident that it's not going to turn out to be wrong, right? So we need to be ready to take better care of ourselves. And a lot of that care is necessarily going to be local. This is, I mean, hyper-local. This is relevant to the mentionings of Adam Greenfield's important book, Lifehouse, in the chat, which is somewhat exemplary in this regard, in taking this kind of thing seriously. The ultimate reason why we need a less centralized future United Kingdom is because it will be more resilient to the devastating impacts that are with virtual certainty coming our way.
Thanks, Rupert. And I think that thing about kind of sharing best practice and really being able to kind of learn what works from other areas is going to be a really important thing that we can hopefully help to put people in touch with and scale those up. I just looking in the chat, Greg and Bonnie, how about adaptation being offered like an outbound course that people willingly do? It's calling for the adventurer, the warrior, the shaman in us all. That might bring forward, that might bring adventurer types forward, which I think is a really nice idea. If there aren't any more immediate questions here or in the chat, what I'm thinking of perhaps doing is introducing Nick and Ed again, because it feels like quite a lot of the questions are quite practical ones, you know, about actually how do we do this stuff. And Nick and Ed, I think, are going to say a little bit more in terms of a call to action. So let me just check that I'm bringing them on earlier than they were expecting, but they are here, they look ready. Is that okay? Can we go to you and do the call to action now? Am I coming to Nick first or Ed first?
No, I'll start. Let me just share my slide. Just bear with me while I get to the slide. There we go. There we go. Yes, so my name is Ed Jarvis and I'm the Safer Campaign Development Lead. And we're just going to run through a few things that you can do to support the campaign. So what can you do? So, well, coming back to what's already been said, really, let's not wait for government. Let's get on and make this happen. Let's be the change we want to see in the world, and let's find out what adaptation-related activities and initiatives are happening in our local communities and get on and support them. And you might find that that's difficult. They're difficult to find. So if you're struggling on that front, come and have a conversation, you know, send us an email. I'll put the email up in a moment and you can get it from our website as well. You should see, there should be a QR code. Yes, there is. There's a QR code on the right-hand side. So scan that, bookmark that, and there's loads more information. It's a new page on the CMP website. So get involved locally. Advocate for adaptation. So, you know, let's have the conversation nationally around what adaptation, climate adaptation, adaptation is how it is an on-ramp to accelerated decarbonisation and nature regeneration. Let's start to have that conversation across the country. So they're two really obvious things to get on with. Now, there's a couple of things that you can do today, even before this meeting finishes. So we have created a petition that is demanding the government create a funded strategic national resilience plan. Okay, so this is on the House of Commons website. I'll share the link in a moment. We need to get to 10,000 signatures in order to have a response from government, and 100,000 in order to have a debate in Parliament. So that is not an easy thing to do. So 99% of all the petitions that are ever created don't really get much above 1,000, and certainly not many get to 10,000, and very, very, very few ever get up to 100,000. So we need your help. So please sign and share the petition across all your networks. Please, if you know of influencers or talent that might be interested in signing and sharing this, would be really interested to hear from you. We've got templates and resources that we can share with those people. And if you've got links into organisations that are experiencing climate change that might be up for sharing the petition, we'd be very interested to hear from you. So people like the Royal Horticultural Society, English Heritage, National Trust. So those kind of organisations, if we could get it out to their membership, that would be amazing. Please help us. It's a really big challenge. Connect via the chat. So if you haven't, I know the chat's really active. If you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, please do. Please share your LinkedIn, please share your email or whatever you want to share. Let's use this as an opportunity to connect, and you can save down the chat using the 3 dots in the chat function, save it down, and we can keep a record of that. Certainly something we'll be doing. So there are 2 things you can do today. And then, yeah, go to the website. On the website, there's a couple of things you could do. We're really interested in people's stories. So stories are so important. So we'd love to build a bit of a library of stories of people that have experienced climate change. So what is your experience been of climate change, flooding, whatever? So I think stories are so powerful in triggering change. Share your plans and your projects for what you're doing around adaptation. So we'd love to get some videos like we had on the 9th of July in a very hot and stuffy room at University College London. We had a couple of amazing organisations, Greener Henley and Retrofit Borsall Heath, talking about what they're doing. We've videoed that. We're going to share that. We'd love to hear your story or your plans. Don't feel like you need to be established in this space. Share your plans and support the campaign more generally. So at this point, I'm going to pass over to Nick Drew. He's the campaign manager, to talk a little bit about what's coming. Nick.
Thanks, Ed. So, I mean, a lot of what we've heard about this morning was about the report, the SAFER report. But really the SAFER report is just the sort of the backdrop to the campaign itself. And the campaign is just getting started. But we've already, and I think from some of the conversations that we've been having this morning, you know, there's clearly a need to connect up the adaptation movement. So one of the things that we're looking to do is to create spaces. I'm looking to create something called the Safer Haven to start to have these conversations between different organisations to understand where there are areas where there's benefit in working together, where some of the gaps might be across the existing adaptation movement, so that we can start to build in through the SAFER campaign. What are the things that people actually need to see in order to get started? Another part of this is around how we reach out. We've already heard from Rupert as well about the SAFER talk or experience and how we can start to transmit the message more widely. So not just amongst those who are already sort of understanding the urgency and the need for adaptation, but how we can really start to engage our communities more widely. So that's another key part of what's coming up in the campaign. We've also got some more reports. Rupert's mentioned of a report, and I think there's a further report that's due in the autumn, which is about how we talk about adaptation more widely. So understanding the current positioning of adaptation in narratives in the media and more widely in society. But this is just the start point, really. And a large part of this is actually acknowledging that we don't have all the answers here. There's a number of people who've been active in this space for many years. And really what we need to do is to make sure that we are working collectively rather than just coming up with some good ideas and say, let's try this. So we've got some particular things that we're trying to pilot, like the safer haven to convene people, like the talk to reach out to communities, like some more reports to try and understand this landscape. But really, the campaign is actually about, let's build up a head of steam, let's build up a movement that are really focused around adaptation in the UK. And let's use that to try and change the national conversation as well. So both things that are happening at the, some of the existing work that's going on with things like the Climate Change Committee's report into adaptation, how we can get more leverage around those things that they've already said, we're just not prepared for what's coming. How can we really start to influence that national conversation? And Ed, if you've got the slides, it's time to go back again and say, look, part of the initial approach here is to start to get this sense of a petition out there, not just to influence government and show how many people are interested in this, but actually as a way to start conversations locally. So what we're asking people to do is to sign and share that petition. But in sharing it, it's to start to have conversations about, hey, I've signed this thing. I think it's really important. What do you think? It gives you a hook to start to have a conversation with people around the importance of resilience. And one of the things that happened around the time that we did the launch, I think it was just the day before the launch, was that the government's National Resilience Action Plan came out. So there's some good things in that, but what isn't present is anything around funding. So really a key aspect of what we're asking for is this needs to be funded. Yeah, we need to find a way to really put some resources into this rather than just it being a kind of a side issue. So that's what the petition looks like. If you go on to the next slide, Ed, this is the QR code for where that petition lives, that website, that government petitions website. But there's also links to it from the Safer webpage, the campaign's webpage, so you can get through it that way as well. But it really feels to me that if we can get this kind of collective call to action for the government to sort of say, look, people are really starting to worry about climate adaptation. We want to see activity happening. That's a key ask from where we are today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nick and Ed. That's really helpful, and I think it has stimulated some more questions in the chat. So someone called Deborah, whose camera and mic doesn't work, so I will read it out. Is the view from anyone at SAFER, is there a view from anyone at SAFER about whether local communities can work with the local government emergency resilience forums? Or is there a risk that they'll feel that any parallel community organisation groups are a threat to their effectiveness in real crises? Rupert, is that one?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to this, but I was going to suggest that Nick starts on this, as this is close to his area of expertise.
Yeah, and I think we've got to work with the existing structures. So the local resilience forums that some people may well be aware of, but they're a statutory response organisation, collective really, so that the forum is made up of a number of responders, largely around things like the emergency services or the Environment Agency, and there's often a voluntary and community sector representative or key lead organisation, often people like the British Red Cross in that space. A lot of what local resilience forums focus on has traditionally been more of the sort of the crises of the sort of shorter term nature, so what they would call acute risks, so a particular incident like a flood or a fire or a pandemic response or something like that. But as we move into an era of greater climate disruption, that sort of national machinery is starting to think more about how do we deal with these longer term emerging threats? How do we deal with things like climate change? And a key part of this is actually what the leadership role is within local resilience forums. And I think there's a real coming together for me of the community scale grassroots movement and how it interfaces with the existing structures and how those structures need to change and evolve. So there's a number of conversations that have been happening in government around things like the Stronger Local Resilience Forum programme to try and evolve those existing bodies into what they might need to be in the future. And there's certainly, I think, a really important role for communities to engage with this. There's often a sort of almost a gap between those official responses and how communities actually respond in emergencies. And I think what's really key is bridging that gap. And I hope that SAFER plays its part in trying to make that happen.
Lovely.
Yeah, let me just add a couple of things to that really helpful response from Nick. And let me also remark that Deborah's question, I'm so glad she asked it. It's quite well up the chat now if you want to try to find it. Rachel Berger has done a really interesting response to it, which is very helpful. So I would add to what Nick said, firstly, that Nick was telling you about the local resilience forums, and I say telling advisedly, because I bet that even the probably quite well-informed audience on this call, I bet that quite a lot of people here didn't really know that there was such a thing, right? And that's part of the point, right? This area is not sufficiently resourced and does not have sufficient attention and profile on it. And that's part of what we're hoping to change. Secondly, one needs to be aware that in those acute situations that Nick was describing, it is very often the case that local people who don't have any official role are in effect the first responders. This is normally what happens in disasters. Local people, ordinary people, have to step up, and if they don't, their neighbors, etc., suffer. But usually they do. This is one of the really exciting things about understanding emergency response and disasters. In my view, Rebecca Solnit's most important book is not the books for which she's most famous, but her book, The Paradise is Built in Hell, which is a fantastic title, about how people respond, getting chills now thinking about it, how people respond to disasters in wonderful and transformative ways. And the final point I'd like to add is that, and as Nick was implying, it's not enough to have acute response. One has to have a response to the chronic threats and challenges. And that again is where we see strategic adaptation as coming in as a helpful frame, attuning people to those kinds of aspects of what we're facing, which are kind of grindingly, slowly getting worse year by year. For example, rising temperatures. Also, the threat of food shortages, which is not something that we're used to in this country, not something we prepare for very much, frankly, but we should, as Tim Lang has shown in his important recent work, which maybe someone can put in the chat. This is the kind of diversity of threats that we need to be building emergency resilience in relation to. When we use this phrase emergency resilience, as in strategic adaptation for emergency resilience, I'm just going to show the lovely physical copy of the report here, but everyone can read it online. If someone puts the link in the chat, that would be great. What we mean by emergency resilience is two things. Firstly, we mean resilience in response to acute emergencies. And secondly, we mean resilience in response to the climate emergency, the long emergency, this grinding thing with a duration of decades and centuries and so forth, right? We need to have both perspectives together. And too often, government is tempted, frankly, to focus on the acute and neglect the chronic and long term. We must have that long term horizon in mind in our adaptation work if we're actually going to succeed in doing adaptation which doesn't just get swept away.
Lovely. Thank you, Rupert. Maybe changing focus a little bit, there's a question, I think, from Ruth around communications. Are you aware of any research on communications around adaptation? We use Climate Outreach's Britain Talks climate research, but it's focused more on mitigation. I'm aware that talking about adaptation means confronting people with some pretty scary realities. I know Liam's done part of a response, I think, already in the chat, but is there any more you wanted to add to that one, Liam?
Well, I can maybe bring it to people's attention. So, I mean, part of the answer is no, there isn't enough research on adaptation and communication. But I think the thing that's important to key on that question is that sometimes the communication about what negative news or negative images results in is a little bit overly summarized when people talk about what the scientific research about scary images is. So if you actually read like reviews of lots of data about messaging, among people who feel they can respond to climate change, negative images are oftentimes really motivating, right? The problem is that most people, when they look at negative images about climate change, don't think they can respond, right? Which is why, we have this central argument that, there's a way that climate change is abstract, right? We say it's abstract, and if we could get more concrete, then it would be more motivating. But the reality is also that like concrete things are scary, right? So we can actually deal with the concrete things more if we feel like we can respond to them. So there's an element in which we tend to remain in this abstract mode because the reality is a bit confronting, right? So building the sense of being part of a viable response to climate threat actually allows us to be motivated by climate threat, right? So that's basically true of every stressor, right? So though we don't have enough research on adaptation kind of dialogue, adaptation messaging, it's like people have dealt with scary stuff before. And one of the things that we'll come back to in research in the near future is just the fact that there's never been a successful mobilization in the history of humanity where we mobilize by telling people that a threat that we face is only half as bad as it really is. Right? Like every time we've actually achieved some massive mobilization of society, if anything, if you think of the world wars, if we think of invasions, if anything, the threat was exaggerated, but then people were made to feel able to respond collectively, right? And which is the difference. And what we've failed to do in climate change is to actually achieve that. So I mean, I've spoken to like a large number of social scientists as part of that research. I have yet to actually meet anybody who disagrees with that after I don't know how many interviews. And it's kind of basic social science. So I think that's something that we'll return to later, and it's very important to that question.
Lovely.
Could I just quickly add to that what there is also research on is on how talking about and doing adaptation is helpful from a depolarization perspective. And the small amount of research that's been done on that is really quite clear that it's much more difficult to culture warize adaptation and to turn people against it than it is with decarbonisation. And this is another reason why we think that the safer approach can work, where the standard mitigation decarbonisation approach of the climate movement so far has on balance failed.
Thanks, Rupert. Zoe, you have your hand up.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Thanks for this. It was sort of a question that's relevant but adjacent to this flow of conversation right now. I'm aware, I haven't gone into the detail, but I'm aware that there appears to be like conflictual stuff going on between CMP and other folk like John Fuller in terms of sort of Stan's approach. There seems to be some conflict going on from what I'm seeing, or and articles flying around. I just want to say that makes me feel really sad. And I really hope there can be some sort of like mediated adult conversation to actually bring people together because we're absolutely on the same side, whoever the we are, so I just wanted to say it makes me feel really, really sad that there's some sort of conflict or going on there around between folk, because essentially we're all fighting the same battles. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. I mean, I don't think it's as polarized quite as you suggest, but I don't know if Liam or Rupert want to come back. I know they've written a response to John, a very polite one, but I think part of it is to do with a misinformation or a misunderstanding, I should say, and perhaps maybe that's on us rather than on him. But I think he really did feel that we were saying this is instead of decarbonisation, forget decarbonisation, just focus on adaptation. And I don't think anyone is remotely saying that. But Liam or Rupert, do you want to have a few words?
Yeah, just as you say, Caroline, I hope that anyone who's watched this call this morning will be clear that some of the criticisms that have been made in relation to the report launch, to the in-person launch in London, misunderstand what we're saying. We I hope have been very clear this morning. This is absolutely not about saying adaptation, yay, mitigation, boo. On the contrary, nor is it about saying that the 𝐚𝐽𝐿 is not an extreme threat. On the contrary. So yeah, I've put the link in the chat to the little response that Liam and I did. Liam may want to add something. I'd just say also that we shouldn't be afraid to have these kinds of arguments and disagreements where there are genuine arguments and disagreements. You know, that's healthy for there to be multiple responses to a big piece of work like this. But yeah, it would be helpful if those arguments and disagreements could be about an actual genuine area of disagreement rather than just a misunderstanding. Liam, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if people saw today's presentation, the initial presentation, some of what was changed is to emphasize those points to make sure we don't get off on the wrong foot. But we also have just learned that this kind of adaptation instead of mitigation framing is so strong that it's really hard to hear the message. So I think what we've done is work on emphasizing it more at the beginning so we don't end up in those arguments. So, you know, it's just remember, it's important to remember that there's a frame that's out there which pits these two things against each other. It's also important to remember that a lot of the population doesn't think about adaptation or mitigation, doesn't have a definition of either of those words to hand, and that isn't really stuck in that framing. So there's two things that we have to mention here, is that we have this frame, and it's really strong, mainly among people who've been involved in the climate movement for some time. And we also have to remember that for a lot of people, adaptation can still be defined because they don't already have like loads of conditioning about it. Maybe another thing to say is we also have another very polite response to Adam Aaron, who is another person who responded to us, which is coming out in Resilience. We could talk about that more if there's time, but I think we don't need to. People can read it for themselves.
Lovely. Thanks, Liam. Okay, look, so I've got two questions, and I'm minded to take them both together, if that's all right, just because we are beginning to run out of time. So, Mike, could you put yours first, and then we'll come to Eddie?
Yeah, I come from Hay-on-Wye, and we didn't get involved in discussions about adaptation or mitigation. We went out and spoke to over 150 people in our community and said, listen, what do you feel about the climate issue? Everybody's concerned. They're all concerned. That was obvious. So what are we going to do about it? Would it be a good idea if we fed ourselves locally? Yes. Would it be a good idea if we owned our own community energy? Yes. Would it be a good idea if we looked after our mental well-being? Yes. So we set up deliberative democracy. We've run 3 assemblies. We've had over 220 people from a community of 2,500 people come to our assemblies. We now have a plan of action. We know what we're doing, and we're getting on with it. As it happens, it also, if we achieve it, will significantly reduce our carbon footprint, and we didn't even have to discuss it. So I don't think we should be having these intellectual arguments about adaptation and mitigation. I think we need to get on with it. Would you agree?
A fantastic question, which I have a lot of sympathy for. Let me go to Eddie next, and then we'll come around for some responses.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on the other C word, conflict. It seems to me that conflict is going to increase in all sorts of different ways and different forms, not least between people on the same side. This is absolutely inevitable. So my question is whether we are giving enough attention to how to respond to that conflict and use that energy in a positive way, and actually embed some kind of conflict transformation strategy within the Climate Majority Project.
Lovely, a really good question, thank you. And there's lots of love being shown for Hay Resilience in the chat, so that's good. Listen, so we've got about 6 minutes, so I'm going to suggest that our main speakers kind of pick one of those 2 questions as they respond, and use this as an opportunity to kind of sum up as well. So Nick, you were nodding most vigorously when you were speaking, so let me go to you first.
Yeah, I think it was really what Mike was saying about just getting on with it was really for me a key message. And I think that we really don't have time to wait for somebody to come and sort this out for us. We have to work at community scale. We have to build those connections that we need. It's all around relationships for me, resilience. So the more that you can do to build relationships, both in your own neighborhood and community, but indeed with other initiatives that might be happening nearby, or even people who are trying to do the same thing but somewhere else in the country. The more that you can network now, I think the stronger and more resilient you're going to be, ready for whatever crisis hits you. So that's really the thing that I was nodding most frequently at, because it just feels there's a lot of urgency behind this, but we're not sort of acting in a way that meets that necessary risk and that urgency.
Lovely, thank you. Ed, do you want to come in?
No, I mean, the bit about let's just get on with that. I think let's be the change we want to see in the world really resonates for me. So let's show the politicians what adaptation looks like. Yeah. And yeah, I think as a movement, we need to focus on where we agree on things and where there's, and talk about where there's legitimate reasons for conversation. But yeah, we need to get on and make the change that needs to happen. I think that's so. I'm focused very much on the actions that need to happen in local communities.
Lovely, thank you. I mean, I think just in defense of a focus on adaptation explicitly, I think certainly when it comes to pushing government to devote more resources to enable local authorities, local communities and so forth to be more active in this area, I think that is a very good reason for why that needs to be part of it as well. But I have a great deal of sympathy with the just get on with it when it comes to the local level. There was a really interesting question about conflict. Liam, I don't know if you wanted to have a first go on that.
Caroline, could I say one more thing before we get to that?
Yeah, sure.
Just on this point, totally all for getting on with it. Having said that, and agreeing with what Caroline just said, I think we should acknowledge also there is a role which sometimes we're not very good at acknowledging in this country for reflection, intellection, etc., in relation to these things. The role, for starters, is a kind of negative one, right? If there is an ideology which is getting in the way of getting on with it, then that ideology needs to be exposed and countered. And there is, right? There is an ideology which, for example, is still dominant in a lot of the climate movement that says we must stay below 1.5 degrees. It's all about mitigation, etc. We have to find ways of countering that in order to make more space for people to just get on with it.
Okay, we now have 3 minutes left. So Liam, on conflict.
So yes, basically, I agree that conflicts, well, certainly, first of all, conflict resolution strategies at the local level is something that was mentioned in the chat. Absolutely, we see adaptation as basically a process. It's going to involve a lot of discussions. It's going to bring up a lot of emotionally difficult issues for people. So having depolarization, conflict resolution at the center of it is going to be important the whole time. So that is part of why CMP has spent a lot of time helping to get an organization called 𝐒𝐿RA, Inner Climate Response Alliance, off the ground. Because the emotional aspects of climate action are oftentimes neglected, and we would count conflict resolution as part of that. So there's a lot to say about that, but absolutely, in order to have a good process, we always need conflict resolution skills. And this is going to be a process where a lot of people have to change their minds and face stuff that they haven't really been facing. So, what that looks like, I think there's quite a lot to say about it that we don't have time right now, but generally agree. And yeah, echo also the previous stuff. Let's get on with it. And I agree that it doesn't surprise me at the local level that we can just get on with it. Like when you actually look at polls of stuff, people don't see the adaptation versus mitigation is not what normal people spend their time worrying about. But elites are a different story, and paid oil lobbyists are another story. So let's not remember that like the oil lobby is very good at not letting us just get on with things. So like we should also not forget about the fact that they haven't started spending money trying to as much money as they could spend trying to frame adaptation as a way to stop doing decarbonization yet. It's probably coming, folks. So you know, like, let's not forget about that.
Fab. Thank you, Liam. A couple of people in the chat are asking how to save the chat. And as I understand it, you just do 3 little dots at the top right hand.
That's right.
That is right. There has been a bit of an issue with the chat. For some reason, some people have lost the first part of the meeting. I think the CMP has still got the full length of the meeting. So we'll have a look at that and we can email that around afterwards. So don't panic if your chat's looking a lot shorter than it should be.
And big thanks to everybody for sharing so much in the chat. It's really been fantastic and lots of connections being made, which is exactly what we were hoping for. We really are now out of time. So it just remains for me to thank you so much for giving up your time this morning. It's been a really good discussion. And I just wonder if I could urge everybody, just as a last act, please do sign that petition and please think of at least 10 people that you could share it with, because we really do need to get this higher up the agenda. And notwithstanding the fact that lots of local groups are doing great work on the ground right now, it would help to scale it up, to amplify it and everything else if government also puts more resource into that. And that's what this petition is about, which Bridie has helpfully just put back into the chat. So if you could do that as an action from today, that would be brilliant. But thank you again so very, very much for all of your engagement and your time. Really appreciate it and look forward to the next one.